Before we crack open tonight's cursed can of content, I just want to say a big thank you to all our subscribers, and an extra Sinister shout out to the loyal members of the Sinister Elite. You legends help keep the darkness alive. If you're enjoying the stories and want to take it a step further, hit that like button, make sure you're subscribed, and consider joining the Sinister Elite by clicking that join button below. Members get access to creepy custom emojis and exclusive Sinister Elite badges that level up the longer you survive with us. It's like loyalty, but spookier. All right, lights off, headphones in, and let's summon something we'll all regret. When my 7-year-old asked for a drum instead of a Nintendo Switch, I thought it was a win for screen time. Then he beat a slow, even cadence at breakfast, stared past my shoulder like I wasn't there, and said, "We keep step until the bugle calls." Don't look back when the bugle sounds, I laughed. My wife didn't. She had that look, one part mom scan, one part, are we raising an old man? "Where'd you hear that, buddy?" I asked, flipping pancakes. "In the wheat," he said, like it was a place we went. "North of town." The smoke made my mouth taste like pennies. Sergeant said the rules keep you from being counted twice. "Counted twice?" my wife asked. "As dead and then as dinner," he said matter of fact, and tapped the drum again. That was the morning the war moved in. Not the one with flags and parades, the other kind. The one that leaves instructions. He started drawing maps in crayon. Long ridges, a forked road, a little box labeled July. He insisted on sleeping with his shoes by the bed, for when the pickets cry out, asked for a blue jacket for Halloween in September, and corrected me when I called it a trumpet. "Bugle," he said, as if remembering the word from inside a dream. We humored him for a week. I Googled Kid Civil War phase. Reddit sent me down a rabbit hole of reincarnation stories I didn't want to believe. My wife pulled out his baby book to prove to herself that he had always been weird in exactly the normal ways. We were both trying to be the sane one. Then he started listing rules. He didn't recite them like a poem. He delivered them in pieces, the way kids deliver terrible news about the dog. In the car seat, never fall asleep when the drums stop. At the grocery store, don't follow a lantern's light off the field. It isn't a man. In the hallway at 2 a.m., standing rigid in the blue glow of the nightlight. When the bugle calls at night, don't look back. "Back at what?" I asked, because I can't help myself. "The ones who forgot," he said, and blinked like waking up. "Can I have water?" We started writing them down on the fridge, not because we believed, but because we had learned the trick about kids. If you take their fear seriously, it gets smaller. Also, neither of us wanted to be the parent who forgot the one rule that actually mattered. By the end of the week, the list looked like this. The Gettysburg rules, as told by our 7-year-old. Never fall asleep when the drums stop. Don't follow a lantern's light off the field. It isn't real. When the bugle calls at night, don't look back. Never answer when the dead call your name. When the smoke clears, keep your head down. The real danger is still watching. Number 5 bothered me for reasons I couldn't name. Maybe because it sounded like something an adult would say after living with consequences. Maybe because our son said it while tying his tiny sneaker, as if he'd tied 1,000 boots before. That Saturday, my wife did the thing I wouldn't. She started verifying. She turned his maps into real ones on her laptop, cross-checking ridges and roads with battlefield diagrams. When our son said it smelled like peaches and manure, she found a letter from a soldier who'd written the same. When he talked about a drum that didn't echo, she found a mention of beating time in wheat where the sound died. And when he fell asleep on the couch, his hand curled over an invisible strap at his shoulder, she showed me a photograph of a boy fifer with the same posture, the same solemn mouth. "Coincidence," I said, "which is what you say when your world is getting rearranged and you want to keep the furniture." That night, the smoke showed up. Not a lot. Not a Hollywood fog bank rolling under the door. Just a thin, metallic smell that didn't belong in a suburban hallway. I checked the stove twice, the outlets, the attic. Nothing. Then, as I walked past our son's door, I heard it. A single clean note from a brass mouth, remote and close at once, like a radio signal slipping through a storm. A bugle. I told myself it was the neighbor's TV. I told myself anything I could say out loud, because the other thing I could say out loud was, "We are being haunted by a war," and that sentence wouldn't survive the room. Our son woke at 3:12 a.m., sat up, and listened. I stood in the doorway with the hall light at my back, suddenly understanding rule number 3 in a new, ugly way. He didn't look at me. He listened to the note, and when it bent downward into something like a call to rise, he whispered, "Don't look back." I didn't. Not because I'm brave, because I was so afraid that my spine locked. Something moved in the hall behind me that wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of breath taken by someone who no longer needed air, the wet edge of a name forming like frost on glass. It was my name. You think you know yourself until your name comes to you from the wrong direction. I gripped the doorframe. Our son spoke in a voice not entirely his. "Dad, they count you twice if you answer." The note faded. The smell thinned. My knees remembered gravity. Our son lay back down and pulled the blanket to his chin like any other kid who needed to be tucked in after a bad dream. In the morning, he didn't remember waking. He did remember the rest of the rules. At lunch, he said, "Don't go outside if you see a light bobbing at the edge of the yard. It will go behind the shed. That is how it hunts." "Lantern?" my wife asked, already pale. He nodded, chewing. "It's not a man." We ate in a quiet that wasn't family-friendly. After he went to draw more maps, my wife turned the laptop around. "The names he's saying: Wadsworth, the Peach Orchard, Seminary Ridge. These are not words he heard on a cartoon. They're... all right?" I stared at the list on the fridge. I wanted to crumple it and throw it away, the way you want to burn the instructions you don't intend to follow because then you're not responsible. But the first rule at war is that pretending you're not on a battlefield doesn't move the bullets. That evening, the lantern came. It started as a glow at the far corner of the backyard, where the fence leans and the grass grows high. It bobbed once, twice, as if a tired arm carried it along. The glass threw off a honey-colored circle, and inside that circle was nothing. Not a hand, not a sleeve, not a shape to hang the light on. Just the glow itself moving with intention. "Don't," my son said from the couch, not looking up from his crayons. "It will go behind the shed and wait for you to follow." I am a grown man, reasonably skeptical, stupid in exactly the way fathers are when someone tests the perimeter of their house. I took a step toward the back door. "Rule 2, my wife said, voice shaking, as if the rules were a seatbelt, and she was yanking it into place. "Don't follow a lantern's light off the field." "This isn't a field," I said, because denial gets very literal when cornered. Our son put down his crayon and finally looked at me, no, through me, to a place I wasn't brave enough to imagine. "It is tonight." The light bobbed, slipped behind the shed, and stopped. I didn't go out. That should feel heroic. It felt like not drowning because you never went into the river. The light waited, patient as weather. After a while, it dimmed. The night gave us back the yard, and the yard gave us back our ordinary fear. Before bed, my son added another rule to the list, a correction delivered with a veteran's weariness. "When the smoke clears, keep your head down. The real danger is still watching." Then, like he was 7 again, he asked if he could have a second dessert because he'd been very brave about the lantern. We let him. What else do you do when nights are keeping score? The last thing I heard before sleep was the soft tap of his toy drum from the other room, an even cadence, counting time for someone who didn't make it home the first time around. My wife taped the list of rules to the fridge in big block letters like it was a grocery run. I didn't want it there. Every time I grabbed milk, I had to stare at words that weren't supposed to exist outside a battlefield. Don't follow the lantern. Don't look back at the bugle. Don't answer when the dead call your name. It should have been a joke. A creepy kid phase. a story we'd laugh about at graduation. Instead, the rules started following us. Sunday morning, I went out to water the garden. The tomatoes had gone wild, choking the trellis, but the smell was wrong. It wasn't green and fresh. It was iron, metallic, like the penny taste my son had described. I tried to shake it off until I heard it. Justin. Not shouted, not whispered. Just placed. It wasn't my wife's voice. It wasn't my kids'. It came from the far corner of the yard, right where the lantern had vanished the night before. I froze. Rule 4 burned in my head. Never answer when the dead call your name. My throat dried up. Instinct says you respond. Because what if it's your wife? What if it's your neighbor? What if it's a cop or someone hurt? That's how voices work. They're social hooks. But the rules weren't written for instincts. They were written for survival. Justin. The second time it was closer. Not the distance of yards, the distance of breath. I ran. I didn't look back until I was inside. The door locked. My son was at the table, calmly coloring a flag with blue and gray crayons. You almost answered, he said without glancing up. I didn't ask how he knew. I didn't want to hear the answer. That afternoon, my wife went deeper into her research. She had pages of notes, printouts of regimental rosters, even scanned letters from the Gettysburg archives. The names our son mentioned, Corporal Devaney, Private Mills, the boy drummer with the crooked stick, were real. Not only real, but clustered around the same unit, the 151st Pennsylvania, a group called the School Teachers Regiment. They were slaughtered at McPherson's Ridge, she said, eyes wide. Our son couldn't possibly know this. But everything he's saying, it checks. I didn't want it to check. I wanted a logical crack, but the facts stacked up, heavy as sandbags. That night, our son woke screaming. He clutched his leg, thrashing, yelling about shrapnel. It's in the bone! I can't walk, he cried. His eyes weren't even open. We tried to shake him awake, but he kept shouting like he was mid-battle. Finally, he stopped, panting, tears running into his hair. He looked at me like I wasn't his father. They didn't follow the rules, he whispered. That's why I had to die. And just like that, he rolled over and slept. The next day, the rules bled into the house. It started with drums. Soft, muffled, like someone practicing in the distance. I thought maybe a neighbor kid had picked up percussion, until the cadence shifted to something martial, a rhythm I'd only ever heard in war documentaries. The sound echoed through the living room. My son stopped playing with Legos, cocked his head and muttered, "Don't fall asleep when the drums stop." I wanted to joke. Guess we won't nap then. But my wife's hand on my arm stopped me. Her nails dug in. She heard it too. Then, at exactly midnight, the drums stopped. The silence was a weight, a suffocating pressure in the air. I realized then what the rule really meant. The danger wasn't the sound. It was the absence of it. From upstairs, something creaked. Not the house settling, not the cat. Too deliberate, too slow. Justin. The voice again. Low, hungry, from the top of the stairs. My son sat bolt upright on the couch, eyes wide, his voice flat. Rule 4. Don't answer. I clamped my teeth shut so hard my jaw hurt. The voice tried again. Justin. Closer, sharper, like a knife under the skin. Then came my wife's name. Lydia. She shuddered, tears streaming. Our son stood now, shaking, small fists clenched. If you answer, they count you twice, he whispered. The air thickened, sour with smoke and iron. Footsteps descended halfway down the stairs and stopped. We didn't breathe. We didn't speak. We didn't answer. After a minute, the steps retreated. The smell lifted. The silence uncoiled. Our son slumped back onto the couch, exhausted. They'll try again, he said simply, like a soldier stating the obvious. I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the fridge list, trying to figure out whether following rules written by dead men was saving us or keeping us trapped. Because I realized something then. The rules weren't just for surviving Gettysburg. They were for surviving what followed it. And whatever followed them had found us. By Monday, our house didn't feel like ours anymore. Every corner carried echoes. The rules weren't just something my son repeated. They were living here, stitched into the walls. I tried to keep life normal. Packed lunches. Drove to work. Pretended my inbox was scarier than phantom bugles. But all day the words gnawed at me. Don't fall asleep when the drums stop. Don't follow the lantern. Don't answer when the dead call your name. And then there was the last one. The one that unsettled me most. When the smoke clears, keep your head down. The real danger is still watching. It felt less like a warning and more like advice from the grave. That night, my wife sat me down with her laptop. Her screen was a mosaic of grainy photos, regimental maps, and death records. She pointed to a name highlighted in yellow. Private Thomas Keller, 151st Pennsylvania. Died July 1st, 1863, McPherson's Ridge. He was 19, she said softly. A drummer. Witnesses wrote he kept the beat even when half his regiment was cut down. They said, when the smoke cleared, he stood up. I frowned. And? She turned the screen. A diary entry from another soldier scrolled into view. The boy drummer rose when the smoke thinned, waving his stick like a banner. A sniper struck him before he could take another step. If he had kept his head low, perhaps he would have lived. My stomach dropped. The exact phrasing. Rule number 5. Our son wasn't just spouting folklore. He was parroting the death of a boy who lived and died 160 years ago. That night, the rules bled deeper into our house. At 11:47 p.m., the smoke arrived. Not from the stove, not from a candle. Thick, gray, rolling across the floorboards like fog. My wife and I scrambled to check alarms. Nothing. The detectors stayed silent, their green light steady. The smoke smelled of gunpowder and singed cloth. Our son bolted upright in bed, eyes wide. "Get down!" he shouted. We ducked instinctively, crouching on the carpet. The smoke thickened, burning our eyes, and then like curtains parting, the haze shifted. Shapes appeared inside it. Men. Dozens of them. Some clutching rifles, some headless, some staggering with wounds that should have killed them twice. They marched past us in a silent column, eyes vacant, mouths half open as if still shouting orders no one could hear. I held my wife's hand, trembling. Our son crawled between us, whispering, "Don't rise. Don't let them see you." The column passed. The smoke began to thin. My chest screamed for air, and then, like a fool, I lifted my head. Just for a second, just enough to see if it was over, and I locked eyes with one of them. He wasn't faceless. He wasn't vacant. His gaze was sharp, furious, aware. A boy's face, streaked with ash, no older than my son. He raised one broken hand in recognition, or accusation. The smoke vanished in an instant, but the face stayed, imprinted in my vision. I knew it then. The rules weren't about fear, they were about camouflage. Following them didn't banish the dead, it just kept you invisible. And by breaking one, I'd been seen. The next morning, my son wouldn't look at me. He ate his cereal in silence, eyes down. Finally, he muttered, "You shouldn't have looked." I tried to brush it off. I was just checking if it was safe. He shook his head. "They know you now." My wife's hands shook as she set down her coffee. "Who knows him?" "The sharpshooter," our son said flatly. "The one who ended me." He pushed his bowl away and added a new line to the fridge list in clumsy marker. 6. If you're seen, you don't get a second chance. That day, I saw the boy's face everywhere, reflected in windows, in the black screen of my phone, in the rearview mirror, just over my shoulder. He wasn't fading. He was waiting. By sundown, I knew the truth. The rules weren't meant for my son. They were meant for me. Because the dead had noticed. And they were watching. By Tuesday night, we weren't pretending anymore. No jokes, no brushing it off. We lived by the rules like they were gospel. Shoes by the bed. Lights off when the drums stopped. Silence when our names were called. But the rules were starting to fray. At 9 p.m., the drums began. Slow, steady. The same cadence that had haunted us for days. They rattled through the floorboards, a rhythm our son tapped along with on the kitchen table like muscle memory. At 9:03, the sound shifted. Instead of one cadence, another overlapped it. Two rhythms, out of step, crashing into each other. My son froze. His crayon rolled off the table. "They're not supposed to call twice," he whispered. "Two sides at once." That's not in the rules. He looked terrified in a way I hadn't seen yet. And when a child who's been giving you instructions on how to survive looks scared, you listen. The air grew heavy, like a storm pressing down on the house. Then, faint but unmistakable, a bugle blew. Not once, twice. The first call came from outside, distant but clear. A rally, a rise and march sound. The second came from inside, the living room. The note wavered like it was played underwater, but it was there. A duplicate, a mocking echo. "Don't look back," my son said automatically, eyes squeezed shut. "But there's two. If you don't look, how do you know which one is real?" His voice cracked. "That's how they trick you." The lantern came next. It didn't wait until midnight this time. At 10:15, it bobbed past the window, golden glow spilling across the curtains. "Stay inside," I hissed. My wife clutched my hand. The light moved toward the shed again, swaying lazily like a fisherman reeling us in. Then another appeared on the opposite side of the yard. Two lanterns, both waiting. The rules said don't follow the lantern. But which one? Both. Neither. What if ignoring the wrong one broke the deal? I realized the awful truth. The rules weren't commandments. They were conditions, and conditions could change. At 11 o'clock, the smoke came, not creeping this time, flooding. It poured through the vents, rolled under doors, wrapped the house in a choking, acrid fog. We hit the floor, coughing, eyes burning. My son screamed, "Down! Stay down!" Shapes rose in the haze. Soldiers again, limping, bleeding, faceless. But this time they weren't marching past. They circled us, formed a ring. Through the gray, I saw him again. The boy sharpshooter. His eyes locked on me, unblinking, hungry. He raised his musket, barrel aimed straight at my chest. I wanted to keep my head down. God, I did. But when a gun is pointed at you, instinct takes over. I looked. The shot rang out, so loud my ears split. But there was no hole in me, no wound, just smoke curling where the bullet should have been. I staggered, breathless. My son grabbed my sleeve, shrieking, "You're already dead to him! You're just too stubborn to lie down." The smoke dissolved, leaving us gasping in the quiet. On the fridge, the rules list had changed. The last line written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. 7. The bugle calls twice when the battle isn't finished. If you hear it, choose your side. I sat at the table, shaking. "Choose your side," I muttered. What the hell does that mean? My son stared at me with eyes that weren't 7 years old. Not anymore. They were older, harder, like someone who had already died once. "It means," he said, voice steady, "they don't just want me back this time." The list on the fridge felt heavier than it had the day my son first spoke the words. 7 rules, ink drying in our house like a siege map. Every time I reached for the milk, my fingers brushed paper that smelled faintly of smoke and old paper. The house no longer belonged to us. It belonged to an argument between the living and the unfinished. When the bugle blew that night, it was not polite. It shredded the quiet, a double call that shivered through the panes. 2 notes, 2 directions. The lanterns bobbed like hungry eyes beyond the hedgerow. The smoke began at the vents and flowed like a tide. My son sat in the middle of the kitchen floor with his drum in his lap. the little stick clutched in fingers that had held it since before he could tie shoes. He stared at it as if it were a heart. "You have to choose," he said quietly, not looking at either of us. "They'll take either him or me." My wife's face folded in ways I'd never seen before. Wrinkled anger, then brittle defeat. "We leave," she said. "We move. We can't run from ghosts," I cut in, and it sounded braver than I felt. "They follow the sound. They follow the calling." My son raised his head finally. His eyes were tired beyond his years. "When the bugle calls twice, you pick. The living pick a side, or the dead pick for you." I thought of the sharpshooter's face burned into my vision, the boy with powder on his cheeks and a pistol-sure glare. I thought of the diary line. If he had kept his head low, perhaps he would have lived. I thought of how my son had died once and come home with a rule set to keep him invisible. And I thought of the way he'd looked at me when he'd said, "They know you now." "You can't be serious," my wife said. "There has to be another way. There has to be." "There is one way," our son said. "You finish the fight." She laughed, a sharp bark that broke before it left her. "Finish the fight? We're not soldiers. We can't march into a war." "You don't march," he answered. "You make the choice. They need someone to stand where the sharpshooter can see him. If someone stands and faces the line, the rest can pass. If no one stands, they take whoever they want." The drum in my son's lap thudded once, a soft accusation. The room seemed to lean forward, listening for a decision. I thought of every stupid, small thing that made me their father. Sweater sleeves smelling of gas on cold mornings, burnt coffee, the way I made him pancakes with the crispy edges he liked. I thought of all the nights I'd been brave for trivial reasons and coward for real ones. I thought of the weight of the rules like a ledger. Follow them and maybe survive. Break them and maybe be seen. My wife stepped toward the fridge and read the list aloud, voice thin. "Never fall asleep when the drums stop. Don't follow a lantern's light. Don't answer when the dead call your name. When the smoke clears, keep your head down. If you're seen, you don't get a second chance. The bugle calls twice when the battle isn't finished. If you hear it, choose your side." She looked at me. The question had no verbs left. It was all nouns now: choice, side, price. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch and watched our son sleep with his little chest rising like a bellows. The drums kept time from somewhere outside the house. Sometimes the rhythm matched his breathing, like his body remembered a cadence older than his bones. The house smelled of gun oil and peaches. The lanterns bobbed at the fence line like mirages. At 3 a.m., when the bugle called and the smoke pressed its face against the windows, I made my choice. I tied my shoes by the bed. Not for running, for walking steady. I brushed my teeth to chase the metallic taste from my mouth. I put on the only jacket I owned that was dark and plain. I took my son's drum. He offered it with no hesitation, as if it were right. And I held the stick like a baton, like a clue. When I opened the back door, the lanterns were waiting. 2 golden rings on either side of the yard. The smoke rolled like a low sea. The air hummed with unfulfilled commands. The dead marched inside that haze. Soldiers who smelled faintly of hay and old blood, their mouths mouthing orders with no breath. I walked into the yard like a man returning to a job he had no aptitude for. The soldier with the sharpshooter's eyes watched from between the drifted smoke. He raised his musket and took aim. For a strange, delicious second, I felt the world narrow to the barrel and the drumstick in my hand. My son crouched by the back door. My wife curled around him like the world's last promise. They didn't follow. They kept their heads down as the rules demanded. I stood in the open. I banged the drum once, 2 beats, then a roll. Not to call anyone, not to charge, to be seen, to give the sharpshooter a shape to fix on. The drum's sound competed with the bugle, and it didn't matter if it was right or wrong. It sounded like life. It sounded like defiance. The soldier raised his rifle. His eyes were thin and bright. The barrel clicked. A note split the night. I felt nothing when the bullet should have hit. I felt instead a tug, an odd peeling sensation at the edges of me, like a portrait being taken from a frame. The smoke closed in as if to stitch the seam. And then, because this is why stories love the last-minute small heroics, I heard my son's drum echo mine, the little hand tapping in time, steady and alive. When the smoke thinned, the lanterns were gone, and the yard was ordinary suburban dark. My wife pulled our son into the house and locked the door. She slammed every bolt like she was nailing the world shut. I stumbled in behind them, hands empty. My jacket was unzipped and I felt lighter, as if something in me had been left out on the grass with the cigarette ash smell. My son looked at me, really looked, and smiled with that exhausted, crooked grin of a kid who'd been spared. On the fridge, in the same neat, unfamiliar hand that had added the 6th rule, a new line had appeared beneath the list. My wife screamed, half laugh, half sob, because the handwriting was mine, and I had no memory of writing it. 8. If someone must be seen, let the one who can choose do so. I chose for you. My son kissed my cheek and said, "You did it, Dad. You chose our side." I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd been through something raw and had come back with holes in his jacket where an old war had stitched him. We slept until noon. The drums didn't call, the lanterns didn't bob, the smoke didn't come back. Weeks later, the doctor asked about stress. The priest offered prayer. Our friends brought casseroles and avoided our eyes in the grocery store. People told us we had a miracle, or PTSD, or luck, or an explanation they could live with. My wife put the paper list in a frame and hung it above the mantel like a relic you don't talk about. Our son slept through the night now, or at least he told us he did. He stopped drawing maps and began drawing pictures of blue skies. Sometimes, when the house was very still and the light slanted just so, I thought I saw a smudge on the fence line where a lantern had hovered. Sometimes I woke up smelling pennies and peaches, and I would sit in the dark and listen for a drum. The sound came only when my son practiced. Little rolls and fills. The private noise of a boy who once kept time for a battle and now kept it for cartoons and bedtime. We never spoke about the sharpshooter again. We didn't have to. The rules had been written, followed, and somehow resolved. They remained on the fridge as a reminder, a map for surviving something that wasn't supposed to follow you home. Sometimes late at night, when I sat at the kitchen table with a coffee gone cold, I would trace my finger over the last line in my handwriting and whisper, "I chose for you," because saying it made it true. My son would stand at the counter and stick his tongue out at me, and I'd think that ordinary petty war, over toys, over bedtimes, over who made the pancakes, was a fair price to pay. The bugle never called twice again. The drums slowed to silence. The lanterns stayed where they belonged. In the past, behind fences that kept even the restless at bay. If you asked my wife, she'd say we were lucky. If you asked my son, he'd tap his drum once and say, "Rules are rules." If you asked me, I'd tell you this. Sometimes survival isn't about hiding. Sometimes it's about the hard, stupid bravery of choosing where you stand.